Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altmann, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Michael Bullis, Dean of the University of Oregon's College of Education. The Somerville Knight Professor of Special Education, he's a nationally recognized expert on at-risk youth and vocational preparation of youth with disabilities. Michael Bullis has studied the adjustment experiences of adolescents returning to the community from correctional settings. His current research focuses on the longitudinal development and community adjustment of at-risk adolescents. As a dean, he is overseeing a $50 million building project, the HEDCO Education Building, and the complete renovations of the historical facilities, which are scheduled for completion this spring. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to talk
me.
to us. Well, we're delighted to have you here, especially because that project is taking form in front of our eyes. It's really exciting.
Yes, it is.
I'd like to start there, if you don't mind. It's a big time at the College of Ed. Can you tell us how the project is coming along and describe some of the special features you're building into this new building?
Well, it's not just the new building. It's the renovation of the historical buildings, which will become known as the Laurier Loque Education Building. And the older buildings, the historical buildings, will have the exact same technological capabilities as the new HEDCO building. So, and actually the older buildings have a great deal of character and are being made to be modern, 21st century buildings. So it's very exciting for people who have been moved into those buildings. The HEDCO building will house two of our departments, Department of Special Education and Clinical Sciences, and also the Department of Counseling, Psychology, and Human Services. And the reason for that is something that we currently don't have. We will have 5 clinics in the new building. Clinic on counseling psychology, couples and family therapy, school psychology, speech, language, and hearing, and then a new clinic, a reading clinic. And those clinics will all be overseen by faculty in those 2 departments and then staffed by students from those 2 departments. And they'll serve not only as training grounds for our students, but also as a gateway for members of the community to come to the university, to come to our college, and receive specific services under the aegis of one of those departments. So that's something that I think is profoundly exciting and has the potential to change not only our training model, but also our interactions with community members.
You're also strategically very well located to do that as a kind of a western gateway to the
Yes,
campus.
we are. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I've always loved about the School of Ed is the physical aspect of the historical buildings. It's such a gracious quad and such beautiful, tranquil space. Yes. The exterior of those will have been preserved, I assume?
The exteriors of those have been preserved. The landscaping has been preserved as closely as possible to the original. Before the project started, we conducted surveys of alumni, donors, former students, and asked what it was that we needed to preserve in this building project. The majority opinion was that we needed to preserve the courtyard that's in the middle of the historical buildings, and to try to replicate that courtyard as closely as possible in the new building. And so we've gone through a process where we have, it sounds like I did it, where the workers have actually ripped up the courtyard, re-poured cement for the walkways, and then put down brick walkway over the cement so it looks exactly as it did before. And they're in the midst then of re-landscaping the courtyard so it'll look as it did 20 years ago.
I'm glad to hear that. I think it's a space we all appreciate, and I know sometimes even those of us from the College of Arts and Sciences teach in your building, so we'll get the benefit of the modern technology and the beautiful buildings.
There you go.
The HEDCO Foundation gift of $10 million was a very significant gift that really got this project launched, I understand. Do you know how the foundation became interested in the College of Ed and what the focus of their work is that coordinates with this?
Actually, the head of the HEDCO Foundation is a woman by the name of Dodie Jernstedt, who happened to be an alumnus of the College of Education, and I won't even hazard a guess as to when she graduated. But she was a speech-language pathologist by training, and happened to be in a family who had a business that was sold and had the means to support various philanthropic and charitable exercises, and decided that she would be more than willing to make an anchor gift for the building project of $10 million. Now, the HEDCO Foundation also donates to other universities and other charitable organizations around the country. But she's been a great advocate for our college, and also won the Presidential Award for the university last year, and so was recognized for her charitable work.
It's wonderful when some of our alumni have the capacity to help us transform and move forward.
Yeah.
Mike, you came in at a very exciting time. You were interim dean in 2005, and then you've moved through a 2-year position and finally into the position as regular dean after national search. You've overseen this whole big transitional phase. Will you be glad when we're all settled in? Well,
I'll be glad when we're out of a construction zone, frankly. It's a little loud and it's a little inconvenient, but I have to say that the Lease Crutcher Lewis, who is the contractor, have been marvelous. The university support people, the university contractors, and the university architects have been just wonderful in terms of supporting us and telling us how things will transpire and what's happening next. And frankly, I'm really going to miss many of the workmen and many of the people who've been instrumental in the project. But, you know, I have to say, while I was fortunate enough to be the dean during this process, the vision for the building was the former dean, Marty Kaufman's vision, and his hard work to secure the 2 large donations that formed the basis of the project, as well as the hundreds of others donations and commitments that came from alumni and friends across the United States, really.
I'm glad you prompted me to acknowledge Dean Kaufman, that these things are a long time in the planning.
You bet.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about the ranking of your college. It's very highly ranked nationally. In 2007, it was ranked by U.S. News and World Report as the 12th best college of education in the country. In 2008, so just last year, it rose in the rankings to be named the 5th best U.S. graduate education program. What factors are pushing it up in the rankings year by year?
Well, one of the things we've done very well for 3 decades is to engage in external funding. And there is a ranking metric that is used regarding the amount of funding that's received relative to number of faculty, tenure-line faculty in particular. And we have been very successful in terms of external funding. We receive, depending upon how it's counted, between $28 and $32 million a year of external funds. And we have 14 research and outreach units through which those funds are directed and administered. So I think that's been a big part of it, but the other part of it is the extent of our reach across the country. Our faculty have developed materials and are working directly in every state in the union, and indirectly in more than 7,000 school districts, 7,000 schools, excuse me, across the country. And that's the kind of reach that is pretty much unprecedented for a college of education, maybe for any college, but certainly for us. So I think those are the 2 big things.
In looking at your profile, I saw that you've been a very successful grant writer for your particular piece of the education research field. Do you think that helps you oversee this big business aspect of your college?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. My first 12 years after my PhD was not at the university, and required that I write proposals and get grants and contracts funded in order to just to live, much less to support the people who worked for me and the work that I did. And I think that is a different culture, and it's a different mentality in terms of looking at ways to make money and be more business-like, I think.
Yeah, and it's not something that all aspects of the university, all sectors of the university participate in equally, but it seems to be something at which your school is particularly successful.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We currently only have 34 tenure lines, but we have close to 800 employees. And it's primarily through our research and outreach units. They're untenured faculty, staff, and support staff who work in that enterprise.
That's a big shop you run.
Yeah, Yes, as a matter of fact, it is.
I wanted to ask a little bit more specifically about the special education program. It itself has been ranked 3rd nationally for 9 consecutive years. Is there an aspect or several aspects of it that are unique to our particular special ed program?
I think so. And I actually have to go back in time to when special ed was started at the University of Oregon. It was one of the first nationally recognized programs, along with University of Wisconsin, Vanderbilt University, University of Oregon.
When was it founded?
It was probably back in the early 60s. And certainly the research and the effort that came about as a result of the Kennedy administration, with the establishment of the Bureau of Education for the Handicapped in 1961 or 1962, was instrumental in that growth. But I think that that certainly set the context for that program. But what has happened is that we do a very good job, I think, of training people in that particular program to be social scientists who happen to specialize in special education. So they tend to look at problems more from a social science kind of perspective than just a straight educational perspective. They look at societal implications, they look at systemic implications, and how disability can be constructed by the system in which it exists. Along the way, we have not had a lot of money, so necessity is the mother of invention. And we have had people who have been excellent in terms of generating programs of scholarship that have changed the way in which educational systems are run. We've had systems in behavior management, social skill training, reading, literacy, and school-wide testing, large-scale testing, that are really at the forefront of what happens in the United States, and that has changed the very way in which education is practiced in this country.
You're suggesting that the social science focus or context for special ed is one of the things that can lead to groundbreaking programming?
Yeah, I think so. We tend to look at the challenges that are apparent in education from a larger perspective than just an educational perspective. It's certainly there, but we tend to look at it from a broader systemic level.
Now, I know that being dean of a large college doesn't leave you a whole lot of time to pursue your own research. You've been a very active researcher, and I know you're keeping it up at least to some degree. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk just a little bit about your own research focus on juvenile delinquency. What are the main factors, if you can generalize and summarize for us, that influence criminal behavior in youth? What are we dealing with kids who get into trouble?
Well, I think I should start by telling you that a lot of my work was on kids who didn't just get into trouble, they got in big trouble. They were remanded to state custody, they were in the Oregon Youth Authority, or they had been, or were leaving the Oregon Youth Authority to come back into the community. So that's a very different sample than just kids who get into trouble generally.
So we're talking about a particular subset who really need pretty serious help to reintegrate?
Yes. About 25% of all adolescents will engage in some kind of behavior for which they'll be arrested at least once. The group...
Excuse me, 25%? Did I hear you correctly, really?
Yeah, but it's at different levels. I mean, for very minor offenses, from car offenses or doing something silly and making a mistake, to serious offenses. The kinds of kids that we worked with in the correctional system were adjudicated at least 9 to 12 times before entering the correctional system. And many of them engaged in behaviors that were sufficiently concerning to have them removed from the general public for a period of time. So this was a different group. And I should tell you that not only did we study them longitudinally over time to look what happened to them, but before I came to the university, we ran direct service programs where we would actually work with kids leaving the correctional system, leaving the mental health system too, coming back into communities to provide services to them and their families directly, both in terms of going back to school, engaging in competitive work, and then trying to find the social services that they needed to support those endeavors.
So you've not only studied the issue, you've also worked on programming and directly with those kids.
Yeah, which wasn't exactly why I got a PhD once upon a time, but it ended up doing some very practical things.
I think that's a very good example of an engaged intellectual, frankly. So what are the implications of the research you've done? What have you found about how best we can serve that population?
You know, I think several things. First, probably the best way to keep kids from, to help kids is to keep them from getting into trouble to begin with. And that's much easier said than done. I really am concerned about the recent economic downturn and what its effect could be on these kids who tend to come from the most vulnerable parts of our society and who tend not to be well served by any social service agency or educational agency. But I think one of the main things we can do is keep them in school. If it's very clear to me that education is one of those major variables that can forestall a great many problems down the road. But if we can't keep them in school, and the dropout rate among this group is around 50 to 60%, depending on the year and depending on when you count. But if you can't keep them in school, then the trick is keeping them out of trouble. How do you do that? It might be that I was raised in the Midwest by parents who'd been raised through the Depression, but I believe pretty strongly in the power of a competitive job. We often would work with kids who had come out of the correctional system, who had made a lot of money doing illegal things, but the power of work was very, very potent with them. They were proud of having a job, they were proud of engaging in work for which they got paid, and then oftentimes we were able to turn those experiences around into educational experiences that they then prompted them to go back into school. Example, I never want to learn algebra because I'll never use it. Well, if you go out in the real world, sometimes you actually have to use algebra for certain tasks related to design, construction. So they could see the application of those academic skills in the work skills, and so would go back. As far as kids leaving the correctional system or leaving the mental health system, because again, we worked with a number of those young people as well, what fascinated me, and we conducted one of the only longitudinal studies of those groups ever in the United States, was the power of being what we call engaged, being back in work, being in work or being back in school in some form 6 months after leaving the facility. If these young people 6 months after leaving the facility would be constructively engaged either in work or school or both, at that time, the probability that they would stay so engaged at 12 months after leaving tripled. And if they could stay out of the system for 12 months, it was a virtual certainty that they would not go back into the correctional system. And that has profound implications for the way in which services are offered. If they can be offered powerfully before they leave and when they first exit the system, and set up these social entrapment kind of, and I mean that in a positive sense, exercises with work or school, they were then able to stay so engaged and not get back into trouble. It was very powerful, and it was also, if we're still doing the analyses, cost effective. It cost much less to afford kids these services than to have them go back into the system.
I have one quick question for a clarification and then a broader one.
Sure.
You used the term competitive job a couple of times. Could you just clarify what you mean by that?
I mean working out in real business.
Oh, I see. So a real life situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
After they'd left the facility and were in the community.
And the other question is to do with your comment about your worries about the economic situation at the moment. Are you fearful that budgets are not going to allow for the kind of social services that catch those kids at that crucial 6-month interval when they leave an institution?
Yes, I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned, I would be concerned without the budget problems because the system doesn't really set up to provide the kinds of services that I'm talking about. And so it always has to be engineered and finessed, but particularly with the budget crisis, I can see those services being cut.
More broadly speaking, with the change in the government recently, with President Obama in power now, do you foresee any sweeping national changes in educational policy that take us beyond the No Child Left Behind
Probably,
line?
But you know what those might be is anybody's guess at this point in time. The current administration has not yet formulated its plan, or at least made it known publicly. And I just came from a meeting in Washington, D.C., and that was the question on everyone's lips: what exactly is going to happen? and nobody seems to know.
Well, it's early days yet,
Yeah.
so I suppose we shouldn't expect them to fix everything at once. But I'm curious about whether people in your position, deans at other well-reputed schools of ed, or you yourself will have input into any kind of a reformulation of the national approach to education?
That's a good question. I would think, given the way this administration has operated to date and the rhetoric that they've given, as well as the individual they've chosen to be Secretary of Education, that they probably will seek input from a broader audience. But how they would do that, I just don't know at this time.
So you'll just stand on the ready,
I'll be ready.
and wait for the phone call,
Yeah.
right? You mentioned earlier, Michael, that the School of Ed is involved all across the country. I think you said in 7,000 schools
Yes.
approximately. But I believe that the College of Education also has a pretty international reach, right?
Yes.
I understand you have initiatives in Mexico, in Southeast Asia, in China, in Chile. Could you talk about those a little bit?
Surely. It's becoming very clear to me that the world in which we are living in Oregon is changing dramatically in terms of demographics. As a result, more and more kids who are in the Oregon schools right now speak Spanish as a first language or come from a Latin culture. Our job as educators is to train those students to learn as best they can, which means that if we are going to do that, we have to train our students, meaning our college students, to become the best teachers they can, which means our faculty need to become aware of what those cultural differences are. So in a way to start to address this, I was fortunate to be able to get private foundation funds to send two groups of faculty down to Mexico, down to Mexico City and Oaxaca, to have exchanges with universities down there, and to come back and then to try to integrate what they had learned regarding the culture, Mexican culture, into the classes they taught specific to our students and what that would mean for them going out as new teachers. Through another set of really associations, we have a number of faculty who have set up individual relationships with groups and universities in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and in Thailand. And it's an initiative that we're trying to lasso and pull together into a coherent structure that we call the Southeast Asia Initiative. And for example, I think in 2 weeks we're having representatives from Catholic Relief Nurseries in Laos come to visit us about possibilities and to see how we might work with them. Where that's going to go is anybody's guess. We do have a formal relationship through a couples and family therapy with Beijing Normal University in China. And our faculty regularly go to China in the summer to teach classes on an invited basis. And we've started on a limited basis faculty exchange with with individuals from Beijing Normal University. And then what else? We have two faculty who've had long-standing associations in Chile and who recently received Fulbright fellowships to work with I don't remember the name of the university in Chile in regard to family therapy and couples therapy. And in addition, one of our special ed faculty works very closely with the Chilean government on school-wide discipline issues. And interestingly enough, both of those activities were happening somewhat in isolation from one another. So again, we're going to try to bring them together so we could have a greater impact and also a stronger association with that country. So if our faculty want to work in that part of the world, they can. And if our students want to have international experiences, they'd be able to go down and have a very meaningful experience for them.
Do you currently have opportunities for your students to go abroad and do any part of their education in another country?
About a third of our undergraduate students, and we only have two undergraduate programs, Family and Human Services, and then an Educational Foundations emphasis that prepares students to go into teaching. But about a third of those undergraduate students will have at least one term abroad during their undergraduate experience.
And they do that actually doing an education curriculum or doing a curriculum related to, say, a Spanish major or an international studies focus?
Both. Usually the latter, but they'll have both.
Here at the university, we're trying to figure out, as you know, how we can get ahead of the curve to prepare for that shifting demographic that you were mentioning. I think the statistic we keep hearing is within 10 years or so, 25% of our undergraduate population will be from Hispanic families.
Yes.
And we need to address that on a curricular level at the university.
Mm-hmm.
How are you all preparing your students to address that in the public schools?
Well, we've done a couple of things. First, we've completely revised our teacher education program in line with this changing reality. We have now had that program. We have an undergraduate program, a master's program where teachers are trained, and then we have just had a doctoral program established that will focus on cultural and educational foundation issues. At the master's level, we plan to emphasize two areas. One, math and science education, which are extreme shortages and high need careers in education in this state and in this country.
Let me just clarify, you mean we need a lot of math and science
Yes.
teachers?
Yes,
That's what
we
you're
do.
saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
But as part of the program that they will go through, those students, as many as possible, we hope all, but it depends on the various practicum experiences they can have, but as many as possible will receive an endorsement to teach English as a second language. And we have hired a faculty member who specializes in that type of emphasis, and we're looking at expanding that work as well.
I know it's a very popular combination for someone to do a Spanish major or minor with us, spend a significant amount of time in a Spanish-speaking country, and then add a teaching credential on the other end.
Yeah.
Has any of your...
Send them all to me.
We will, we do. It's one of the biggest outlets for my particular department, which is Romance Languages, as you know. And just in closing, Michael, do you have any international experience yourself? Have you been able to take your programs anywhere outside the U.S.?
Well, it so happens that I am going to give a keynote in Australia at their National Special Education Conference on some of the work I've done. But I myself have been very limited in terms of international travel. I only went to Europe for the first time 2 years ago.
Well, better late than never.
But I would welcome that kind of opportunity. But given now that I'm a dean and not a scholar or a practicing scholar, I'll have to wait and see how that'll all work out.
Very briefly, what's the topic of your address in Australia going to be?
I became fascinated with the kids we studied, and that any of them were successful. And yet over time, many of them grew up and became outstanding citizens, earned college degrees, some earned PhDs, became wonderful parents. And I just became fascinated with how they could do that. So people who succeed in that way are called resilient. And so we conducted both quantitative and qualitative studies of this group over a period of time to see what was it that made them successful. So I'm going to talk about that.
That would be great, and I'm sorry to have to cut you off there, but I'm afraid we're out of time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. We've been speaking with Michael Bullis, Dean of the College of Education at the University of Oregon. Thanks very much for watching.